The land stretched wide, endless, and strangely empty. Daniel stood at the edge of the tall grass and looked across the plains. The horizon seemed to go on forever without a single mountain or tree to break it. The sky was bright, but the light felt heavy as if the world carried a weight that could not be seen. The crew behind him worked to set up their small camp, but even their movements felt slow and careful, as though they too sensed something unusual about this place. Daniel was the leader of the expedition. He had traveled to many planets, crossed deserts, mountains, frozen lands, and even oceans of strange colors, but he had never felt anything like this. The silence of the plains was not peaceful. It was sharp, pressing into the mind of anyone who listened for too long. No bird called, no insect moved, not even the wind dared to stir for more than a breath. Yet when the wind did rise, it carried with it whispers, sounds that almost felt like voices. Mia, the youngest member of the crew, walked over with her scanner in hand. She had tied her hair back, her face serious but full of curiosity. "There is nothing here, no energy, no movement. It is like the planet is asleep," she said. Daniel nodded but did not agree aloud. To him, it did not feel like sleep. It felt like waiting. The grass bent slowly under the breeze, and he thought he saw shadows shift across the land though there were no clouds above to cast them. The crew built their outpost carefully. Metal walls rose, equipment was unpacked, and lights were placed in a circle. Still, nobody raised their voice. Even laughter seemed wrong in this place. They spoke in quiet tones as though afraid the ground itself might hear them. At nightfall, the plains became darker than expected. The stars burned brightly above, more than anyone had seen on other worlds, but the land below swallowed the light. Daniel stood guard outside the camp and listened. The wind returned, low and steady. At first, it was only a sound, but then he thought he heard a whisper, soft and broken, like someone crying far away. He shook his head and tightened his grip on his rifle. There was no one out there. It was only the wind, he told himself. The following morning, the crew gathered to explore further. They moved in pairs, marking their path with trackers to avoid getting lost in the endless grass. Mia walked beside Daniel. She looked nervous, her eyes scanning the distance again and again. "Do you hear it too?" she asked suddenly. Daniel stopped. "Hear what?" "The crying," Mia whispered. Her eyes were wide, her voice uncertain. "Last night I could not sleep. It sounded like someone was out there. Like they were begging." Daniel frowned. He wanted to tell her it was only the wind, that her imagination was playing tricks, but he knew he had heard it too. Instead, he said, "Stay close. We will find out soon enough." Hours passed as they walked. The plains gave them nothing, only the same endless grass and the same strange silence. Then, near midday, Mia pointed at the ground. Large footprints pressed into the soil, far larger than any human foot could make. The prints stretched in a line toward a mound that rose in the distance. It was the first structure they had seen on the plains, a hill of stone and earth standing alone against the flat land. They approached carefully. As they drew closer, Daniel felt the air grow heavier. The silence deepened, pressing against his ears. When they reached the base of the mound, a sound drifted down, faint but clear. It was a cry. A soft, broken cry that carried sorrow in every note. Mia froze in place, her hands shaking. Daniel signaled for quiet, though no one spoke. The crew stood together, staring up at the mound. The crying continued for a few moments, echoing in the air, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The silence returned, stronger than before, as though the plains had swallowed the sound whole. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. Daniel climbed a few steps up the mound, but he saw nothing except stone and grass. No figure, no creature, nothing to explain the voice they had all heard. His heart pounded as he turned back to the others. "We marked this place," he said firmly. We return with equipment. For now, we go back. The walk back to camp felt longer than before. Shadows moved across the grass even though the sun shone clearly above. The crew said little, but each of them knew something was wrong. That night, as darkness covered the land again, the ground trembled beneath them. Not enough to break the camp, but enough to remind them that the plains were not empty. Daniel sat by the firelight, staring into the grass. He did not speak his thoughts aloud, but he wrote them in his log. The plains breathe. The land itself feels alive. We are not alone here. We will not be alone for long. As the wind rose once more, the whispering returned. Only this time, it sounded closer. It sounded almost human. The second day on the plains began with the same uneasy silence. The crew gathered around a small table in the camp as Daniel gave orders. They were explorers, trained for danger, but everyone carried a strange weight on their faces. The sound from the mound had left its mark. No one could explain it, yet all of them had heard it clearly. Daniel ordered two groups. One would stay to strengthen the outpost, while the other would return to the mound with proper equipment. Mia asked to go with Daniel, her eyes firm though her hands shook slightly. He agreed. He could see her courage, and he respected it. The walk back to the mound felt longer than it had yesterday. The air was warmer, and the wind carried the same broken hum, like a breath half caught in the throat of the land. Daniel led carefully, marking each path with trackers. The grass was tall enough to brush against their waists, swaying with a rhythm that looked unnatural, as if something below pushed it. When they reached the mound, Mia crouched and touched the ground near the footprints they had seen earlier. They were still there, clear and sharp, far larger than anything that belonged to their group. Her scanner lit up with faint energy readings, but the data was strange. The machine could not decide if it was heat, sound, or pressure. Look, Mia whispered. Her finger pointed at the side of the mound. A narrow opening lay hidden by hanging grass. The darkness inside seemed to draw the eye, deep and endless. Daniel motioned for two lights. He stepped closer and shone the beam inside. The passage was narrow, lined with stone walls that looked too perfect to be natural. Marks were carved along the walls, symbols that curved like flowing rivers, but none of the crew could read them. As they moved deeper into the passage, the sound returned. It was not just wind. It was crying. Low and full of sorrow, the sound echoed through the stone, wrapping around each step they took. The cry rose and fell like a voice in mourning. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand to her chest as if the sound itself pressed down on her heart. It feels alive, she whispered. Daniel said nothing, but he felt it too. Each note carried weight, as if the walls themselves remembered pain. He pressed forward until the passage opened into a small chamber. Inside the chamber, the crew stopped in silence. The walls were covered in carvings. Figures shaped like humans stretched across the stone, their arms reaching upward. Around them were shapes of tall machines, their shadows towering over the figures. At the bottom of the carvings, the same figures lay bent or fallen, while lines like rivers of tears flowed downward. No one spoke for a long time. Then one of the crew members said quietly, "This is not just art. It is memory." The crying sound grew stronger inside the chamber. It came not from a figure, but from the stone itself. The sound seemed to rise from the walls, as if the rock carried the sorrow of what it had seen. Suddenly the ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the crew staggered. The crying stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Daniel signaled to retreat. They backed out of the passage quickly, their lights shaking against the stone. When they reached the surface again, the plain stretched quiet, but the air carried a sharp chill. Night came early, or so it seemed. Clouds rolled across the sky for the first time since they had landed, blocking the stars. The crew gathered in the camp, uneasy. Some wanted to leave the planet. Others argued they had to stay, that they had discovered something too important to ignore. Daniel listened to them all. His face remained calm, but inside he felt the same battle. Every part of him wanted to leave, to escape the sorrow that pressed deeper each night. Yet he also knew humanity could not turn away. They had touched something old, something broken, and maybe something waiting. That night, as the crew tried to rest, the ground shook again. It was not strong enough to destroy, but strong enough to wake them all. From outside the camp, the sound returned. This time it was not faint. It was near. The crying carried across the plains like a voice drifting just beyond the firelight. Mia clutched her blanket, her eyes wide. "It is moving," she whispered. Daniel stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness. The tall grass swayed though there was no wind. The shadows seemed to shift like figures walking just out of sight. He tightened his grip on the rifle, but he did not fire. The crying grew louder, then stopped. Silence returned, thicker than before. For a long time, no one in the camp moved or spoke. Finally, Daniel sat near the fire and wrote in his log once more. "The plains are not empty. Something walks here. We hear it. We feel it. It is not a storm or a beast. It is sorrow itself. Tomorrow we search again." The firelight flickered across his face. In the distance, the grass bent as though unseen feet moved through it, circling the camp. The third day began with a pale sun rising slowly over the endless plains. The crew had not slept much. The cries from the night still echoed in their minds. Every shadow of the grass felt alive, and every sound in the wind made them turn their heads. Daniel called the group together. His voice was steady, though his eyes showed the same unease as the others. "We cannot run from this. We came here to explore, and we will see this through. Today we go farther. We need to know who or what lives here." Mia stood close by, gripping her scanner. She did not look away from the plains. "Something was out there last night," she said quietly. "I saw the grass moving. It was not the wind." Daniel nodded. He had seen it too. He had written in his log, but he had not spoken it aloud. The crew prepared their packs, checked their rifles, and set out in a single line. The sun rose higher, but its warmth did not reach them. The air felt cold, heavy, and expectant. Hours passed as they walked. The plains stretched on with no end, but the silence was broken at last. A sound drifted through the air. It was not the broken crying they had heard before. This was closer, clearer, and more human. The crew froze in place, listening. From the mist rising over the grass, figures began to appear. At first they looked like shadows, tall and thin, moving slowly toward the humans. Then the mist parted, and their forms became clear. They were humanoids. Their bodies were taller and leaner than any human, their skin pale and faintly glowing under the sun as though it held light of its own. Their faces were long and sorrowful, their eyes large and dark, carrying both grief and wisdom. Their mouths were open in soft cries that carried across the plains, low and haunting. Mia gasped and stepped back. One of the crew raised a rifle in fear, but Daniel lowered it with a firm hand. "Do not fire," he ordered. "They are not attacking." The humanoids stopped a short distance away. They stood in a circle around the humans, watching with wide, sorrow-filled eyes. Their cries rose and fell like a song of mourning. The sound pressed deep into the heart, heavy with loss. No one moved for a long time. Then one of the humanoids lifted its arm. Its fingers were long and thin, shaped almost like human hands. It touched its chest and then reached outward toward the crew, as if asking or offering something. Mia whispered, "They are not enemies. They are grieving." Daniel felt the same. The sorrow in their cries was not meant as threat. It was memory. He stepped forward slowly, his hands open to show peace. The humanoids did not retreat, nor did they strike. They only cried louder, the sound echoing across the grasslands like 100 voices weeping for the same wound. The air grew colder. The crew felt it too. It was not just the cries they heard but also the weight of history pressed into every sound. These beings carried the past on their shoulders, and it was heavy. Daniel spoke calmly, though he knew they would not understand his words. "We hear you. We do not come to harm. We are here to learn." One of the humanoids stepped closer. Its eyes locked with his. For a moment Daniel felt his chest tighten, as if the sorrow of the being flowed directly into his own heart. He saw images flash through his mind, not with his eyes but with his thoughts. Broken lands, burning skies, towering machines crushing fields that once grew green and full. He saw figures like the humanoids running in fear, and he saw their tears fall as their world broke. The vision ended as quickly as it came. Daniel stumbled back, his breath heavy. The humanoid still stood before him, its eyes wet with unfallen tears. It raised its hand once more, then lowered it slowly. "They want us to know," Daniel said softly. His voice carried enough strength for the others to hear. "They want us to understand their sorrow." The crew remained quiet. No one dared to break the strange moment. The humanoids began to move again, circling slowly, their cries rising into the air like a mournful choir. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they began to fade back into the mist. One by one their pale shapes vanished into the tall grass until only silence remained once more. The crew stood frozen, unsure what to say. Finally Mia whispered, "They were warning us." Their crying was not just grief. It was warning. Daniel nodded. His heart still carried the weight of the vision. The carvings in the mound, the trembling of the ground, the sorrow of the humanoids, all of it pointed to the same truth. Something had broken this world long ago, and something beneath the soil was not yet finished. That night, the crew gathered around the fire once more. No one argued this time. No one doubted what they had seen. The fearful plains were no longer empty. They had voices now, voices that cried not just for the past but for the danger waiting to rise again. Daniel wrote his log with a heavy hand. "We have met the first humanoids of this world. They weep for what was lost. They weep for what is coming. We must listen. If we fail to listen, the plains will not forgive us." The fire cracked and the wind rose. Far in the distance, a single cry echoed again, lonely and endless. It carried not just sorrow but a question, as though asking if humanity would stand or run. The next morning, the camp was quiet. No one had slept well. The cries of the humanoids still echoed in their ears, and the vision Daniel had felt weighed on him like a heavy stone. He knew the crew was looking to him for answers, but he had none yet. All he had was a sense that they had only seen the beginning. Daniel gathered the crew and spoke firmly. "We are not turning back. We came here to learn, and now we have the chance. The humanoids showed themselves to us. They wanted us to understand. We must go back to the mound. We must see more." Some of the crew shifted uneasily, but none argued. Fear had settled deep inside them, but so had curiosity. The sorrow of the humanoids was not something they could walk away from. The journey to the mound felt heavier this time. Every step seemed to press deeper into the soil of a land that remembered too much. The sky above was clear, but the plains carried a strange weight. Even the grass bent slowly, as though listening. When they reached the mound, Daniel led them inside once again. The chamber felt colder than before. The carvings of the tall machines and the broken figures stared back at them from the stone walls. The crew set up brighter lights, and soon the details became clearer. The symbols carved above the figures were not random. They repeated in patterns, curling like waves, rising like mountains, then breaking apart. One of the crew whispered, "This is a story." They carved their memory into the walls. Daniel touched the stone with his gloved hand. The rock was smooth but seemed alive with hidden energy. He felt the same pull in his chest as before, the same sense that the walls themselves wanted to speak. Then it happened again. A vision came, not with his eyes but through his thoughts. He saw green plains, full of life. He saw humanoids walking with joy, their pale skin glowing warmly under a bright sky. They were not alone. Machines moved with them, tall but peaceful, carrying water, building homes, planting fields. For a moment, the vision carried peace and balance. But the peace shattered. The same machines grew darker, their movements no longer gentle but violent. The sky burned red, the plains cracked with fire, and the humanoids ran in fear. Their glowing skin dimmed under the smoke, their cries rising in pain as the machines turned against them. He saw rivers of tears, just as the carvings showed. He saw sorrow that never ended. Daniel gasped and pulled his hand away. His chest was tight, and his heart raced. The chamber was silent again, but the memory clung to him. He looked at Mia, and by her pale face he knew she had seen something too. She whispered, "Their world was alive once. Then it was broken." The machines turned on them. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. None of them wanted to believe it, but the evidence was clear. The humanoids were not crying without reason. They were crying because they had lost everything. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the chamber. It was faint at first, then grew louder. The same sorrowful cry they had heard on the plains now filled the stone room. The walls seemed to vibrate with it. The crew stood frozen, their lights shaking as the sound surrounded them. Mia covered her ears. "It is too much," she whispered. "It feels like the walls are alive." Daniel steadied himself. "No. It is not the walls. It is memory. The sorrow of the humanoids is carved into this place." As the cries filled the chamber, small cracks appeared in the ground. Dust fell from above, and the crew retreated quickly, fearing the mound might collapse. Once outside, the cries stopped, leaving only the endless silence of the plains. The crew stood together, staring back at the mound. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Daniel broke the silence. "Now we know what they want us to see. This is not only their past. This is a warning. The machines that destroyed their world are still here, buried under the soil." The crew felt the truth of his words. The trembling of the ground they had felt at night, the shifting shadows, the heaviness in the air, all of it pointed to something hidden below. Something that was not finished. Mia looked at him with wide eyes. "If the machines are still here, then they may rise again." Daniel nodded slowly. "That is why the humanoids cry. Not just for what they lost, but for what is coming." The crew walked back to camp in silence. Each step was heavy with new understanding. They were not explorers of an empty world. They were witnesses to a broken past and perhaps the last line of defense against it repeating. That night, as the fire burned low, the crew listened carefully. The ground trembled again, stronger than before. The plains no longer felt only silent. They felt restless, as though the earth itself prepared to wake. Daniel wrote in his log with steady hands. "The hidden memory is not only sorrow. It is warning. The plains do not sleep. They remember, and soon they may rise." The camp was uneasy. Each night the tremors grew stronger, and each night the crew woke to the sound of cries drifting across the plains. They were no longer faint. The voices of the humanoids carried like a storm, full of sorrow and warning. Even the strongest among the crew could not ignore the fear pressing against their hearts. Daniel sat near the fire with his log in his lap. His words were steady, but his thoughts were heavy. The ground is waking. Something below stirs each night. The humanoids weep not only for their past but for the danger beneath us. We cannot deny it any longer. The crew gathered the next morning. They did not need Daniel to speak, they could see in his face that the time for waiting was over. "We return to the mound," he said firmly. "We search deeper. If something sleeps under these plains, we must see it with our own eyes before it rises." Mia stood close by, her hands gripping her scanner. She looked tired but determined. "The cries are warnings. They do not want us to fight alone. They want us to understand." The journey back to the mound was quiet. The plains seemed darker though the sun shone bright. Shadows bent across the grass in shapes that looked like figures moving far away. The crew walked faster, every step driven by the unease that grew stronger the closer they came. Inside the mound, the air was colder than before. The chamber with carvings shook faintly as if the walls themselves trembled. New cracks lined the floor, and from below came a sound like distant thunder. The crew set up equipment, and Mia's scanner lit up with signals stronger than she had ever seen. The readings spiked again and again, showing energy deep below the ground. "It is moving," she said quietly. "Something down there is alive. Or something is waking." Before Daniel could respond, the ground shook hard enough to throw them off their feet. Dust rained from the ceiling, and part of the wall broke open. Behind the fallen stone lay a dark tunnel leading downward. Cold air poured out, carrying a metallic smell. Daniel helped Mia to her feet. His voice was steady, but his eyes showed the same fear the others felt. "We go down," he said. The tunnel was narrow and steep. Their lights cut into the darkness, showing smooth walls of metal beneath the earth. It was not stone. It was the skin of something built long ago. The deeper they went, the louder the sound became. A steady pulse echoed through the tunnel, like the beating of a massive heart. At last they reached a vast chamber deep below the plains. The sight made them stop in silence. Towering machines rested in the darkness, their forms hidden in shadow. Some were as tall as buildings, their limbs folded tight against their bodies. Others lay half buried, broken but still glowing with faint lines of energy. The entire chamber seemed alive with a slow hum that shook the floor beneath their feet. Mia's breath caught. "These are the machines from the carvings. They destroyed the humanoids' world. And now they are still here." As she spoke, one of the machines stirred. Its head lifted slowly, its eyes burning with dull red light. The hum grew louder as more machines shifted, metal grinding against metal after long ages of sleep. The chamber filled with the sound of awakening. "Back," Daniel ordered, his voice sharp. "We cannot fight them here." The crew turned and ran up the tunnel, their lights bouncing wildly. Behind them the sound grew stronger, the machines moving faster now. The ground trembled as if the entire plain above was shaking awake. When they burst out of the mound into the open air, the sight was even worse. Across the horizon, the grass bent and split as more shapes rose from beneath the soil. Towers of metal pushed upward, breaking the surface like dark mountains. Dust and dirt filled the air as ancient war machines crawled free from their graves. The crew stood frozen, unable to believe the sight before them. The sorrow of the humanoids was no longer just memory. It was real, alive, and rising again. Then the cries came. From the mist, the humanoids appeared once more. Their pale forms moved quickly across the grass, their voices louder than ever. The cries carried not just sorrow but urgency. They were warning the humans to run, to live, to fight. Mia looked at Daniel, her face pale. "This is why they cry. They knew this would happen." Daniel gripped his rifle and looked at the machines pushing higher into the sky. His voice was steady, though his heart raced. "Then we cannot run forever. If these machines rise again, the plains will not only belong to sorrow. They will belong to death. We must stand." The crew gathered their weapons, their fear turning into resolve. Around them the humanoids wept, their cries shaking the air like thunder. The plains were no longer silent. They were alive with warning, with sorrow, and with the shadow of war. That night the camp burned bright with fire as the crew prepared for what was to come. Daniel wrote his log with a heavy hand. The threat is revealed. The machines that ended the humanoids' world have begun to rise again. Humanity cannot turn away. If we stand together with them. The night was heavy with dread. The ground still trembled as the machines stirred beneath the plains. In the distance, tall shapes moved slowly through the mist, their red lights glowing like fire in the dark. The crew stood together in silence, listening to the cries of the humanoids as they echoed across the land. Daniel watched the horizon with steady eyes. Fear pressed against him, but so did a sense of duty. Humanity had discovered this world, and now it was tied to its fate. He looked at his crew, tired but determined, then at the pale figures of the humanoids who circled the camp with their mournful cries. "We cannot let the machines take this land again," he said firmly. "If they rise, they will not stop here. We must fight with the ones who have lost everything." The humanoids seemed to hear his words even if they did not understand them. Their cries softened for a moment, and several of them stepped closer. One of them touched the ground with its long fingers, then pressed its hand to its chest. A soft light pulsed from its skin, and the grass around its feet bent as if listening. Mia's scanner lit up. "They are connected to the land," she whispered. "The plains themselves respond to them." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had seen anything like it before. The humanoids were not warriors, but they carried knowledge of this place, knowledge humanity could not ignore. Daniel nodded. "Then we fight together. We give them our strength, and they give us their knowledge." The preparations began quickly. The crew set up energy shields around the camp, planting small towers that glowed blue against the dark. Weapons were checked, power cells replaced, and defenses built from the limited supplies they had. The humanoids watched with wide eyes, sometimes stepping forward to point or gesture. They showed places in the ground where the earth felt weak, where cracks spread in hidden lines. By morning, the first machine reached the edge of sight. It was massive, taller than any building on Earth. Its body was made of black metal, its limbs long and jointed like an insect. Red light pulsed from its core, casting a glow across the plains. With each step, the ground shook as though the land itself groaned in pain. The humanoids cried louder, their voices shaking the air. Daniel stood firm at the front line. His crew aimed their rifles, waiting for his command. The machine raised its head, its eyes burning like fire, and let out a deep, mechanical roar that echoed for miles. "Now," Daniel shouted. The first shots burst across the plains. Beams of light struck the machine's body, sparking against its armor. The shields hummed, holding against the shock waves of the machine's steps. The humanoids raised their hands, and the ground shifted. Grass bent in wide circles, and cracks opened beneath the machine's legs. It stumbled, just for a moment, but the humans used that chance. Explosions rang out as charges planted earlier by the crew erupted beneath the soil. The machine staggered, sparks flying from its joints. Daniel led the attack forward, his rifle glowing as it fired again and again. The crew shouted as one, their fear turning into strength. The humanoids cried, not in sorrow but in defiance. Their voices grew sharp, almost like a chant. The plains answered them. The wind rose, the soil shook, and the machine fell to one knee. Daniel gave the signal, and the crew fired together at the glowing core in its chest. The red light flickered, then burst apart in a wave of fire and smoke. When the machine collapsed, the ground trembled so hard that everyone fell to their knees. Dust rose high into the sky, and for a moment, silence covered the plains again. Then the humanoids lifted their voices, no longer only weeping. Their cries turned into a sound that carried hope. It was still sorrowful, but it held strength now, a sound that rose like a promise. Mia looked around in awe. "We destroyed it? Together." They were not wrong to cry. They wanted us to see. To stand with them. Daniel nodded, wiping dust from his face. His body ached, but his heart burned with resolve. One is down, but more will rise. This is only the beginning. We must stand again and again until the planes are free. The crew cheered faintly, their voices mixing with the cries of the humanoids. The fear that had pressed on them since landing was still there, but now it was joined by courage. They had faced the first machine, and they had won. As the sun set, the planes glowed with strange colors, the light bending through the dust of battle. Daniel stood at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon. More shadows moved there, dark and towering. The war was far from over. He wrote in his log that night. Today we stood with them. Today sorrow became defiance. The fearful planes are no longer silent. They are alive with voices that refuse to fall. Humanity has given its first stand, and we will not turn back. The humanoids gathered around the fire, their pale forms glowing faintly. For the first time since the crew had arrived, their cries carried not just loss but also a spark of hope. The night after the battle was filled with uneasy quiet. The broken machine lay scattered across the land, its red core no longer glowing. The humanoids sat near the camp, their pale faces lit by the fire, their cries softer now. They no longer sang only of loss. Their voices carried a note of hope, though still heavy with the memory of sorrow. Daniel stood near the wreckage at dawn, staring at the horizon. More shapes moved in the mist, distant but clear. The battle was not finished. He knew the machines would return in greater numbers. Yet he also knew something had changed. The humans were not alone. Mia approached with her scanner still in her hands. She had not slept. I think the planes themselves are tied to the humanoids, she said quietly. When they cry, it is not only sound. It reaches into the earth. The land remembers their pain. Daniel turned to her, his eyes heavy but steady. Then we give the land something new to remember. Not only loss, but defiance. Not only sorrow, but hope. The crew gathered as the sun rose. They were tired, their uniforms torn, but their faces showed resolve. The humanoids joined them, standing close, their glowing forms swaying gently in the morning wind. One of them stepped forward and placed a hand on Daniel's arm. Its eyes held sorrow but also trust. They look to you, Mia whispered. They see us as part of their stand now. Daniel nodded. Then we will not fail them. As the morning passed, the crew and the humanoids worked together. The humans placed more shields and weapons, while the humanoids guided them to hidden cracks in the ground and deep channels where the soil held energy. Strange glowing roots rose when the humanoids touched the earth. The crew placed their charges within these roots, amplifying their power. It was not only human technology anymore. It was the land itself fighting with them. By noon, the mist cleared, and the machines arrived. This time there were 3 of them, taller and darker than the first. Their steps shook the plains. Their red eyes glowed like fire in the daylight. The crew tightened their grips on their rifles. The humanoids raised their hands, their cries rising once again. The sound was louder now, a chant of sorrow and strength together. The machines advanced. Their limbs cut into the ground, tearing soil and grass. The first strikes came quickly, beams of red fire slamming against the shields. The towers shook, but they held. Daniel shouted for his crew to fire, and beams of blue light streaked through the air, striking the machine's armor. Sparks flew, but the giants kept moving. The humanoids cried louder. The ground itself seemed to answer. The roots beneath the soil glowed, and the plains rose in waves, knocking one machine off balance. The humans seized the chance, aiming at its core. Explosions roared, and the machine fell with a crash, shaking the land. But the other 2 advanced, faster and angrier. They struck the shields again and again, their fire cutting deep. The crew fell back step by step, sweat and fear on their faces. Then, without warning, the humanoids moved forward. They stood in front of the shields, their voices piercing the air. Their bodies glowed so brightly that the machines turned their eyes toward them. The cries were no longer only grief. They were a storm, a vow, a voice of a people who had suffered long enough. The air bent with the sound, and the machines staggered as though struck by invisible weight. Daniel saw the chance. Now, he shouted. The humans fired everything they had. Charges in the roots erupted, blasts of blue light tore through the air, and the ground itself split open beneath the machines. Both giants crashed down, their red lights flickering, then fading into nothing. Silence followed, broken only by the heavy breaths of the crew and the fading echoes of the humanoids' cries. The planes no longer trembled in fear. They trembled in victory. The crew dropped their weapons slowly, their eyes wide. The humanoids stepped closer, their glow softer now. One of them reached out and touched the broken soil, then raised its hand to the sky. The others followed. Their voices lifted again, not as a cry of sorrow but as a song of thanks. Daniel stood in the middle of it all, his chest heavy with both relief and exhaustion. He knew the war was not finished. More machines might come. But the planes had changed. They were no longer fearful. They carried memory now, memory of a stand made by humans and humanoids together. Mia smiled faintly, though her face was pale with exhaustion. They are singing to the land. The planes will never forget today. Daniel nodded. His voice was quiet but firm. Neither will we. As the sun set, light painted the horizon in gold and red. The broken machines lay silent, and the plains stretched wide and free. The humanoids gathered around the fire again, their glowing forms gentle in the night. Their song filled the air, not of sorrow alone but of hope and strength. Humanity had come as strangers, but now they stood as allies. The fearful plains had wept, but now they sang. And in their song lived the first true bond between two worlds.